And transportation and public safety is in order now. We have two presentations today. We have no bills, so we should be pretty quick. I want to thank the committee and thank our analysts for always working very diligently and hard on this committee. We do a lot, and it's an honor to be the chairman once again. So without further ado, and I want to start with a couple comments after the secretary gets to the dais. We have the Honorable Shep Miller, Secretary of Transportation, who has been doing some yeoman's work during the storm period. And I just want to thank VDOT and your team for all the hard work in getting the snow cleared, especially up in our way in Northern Virginia, because this was a lot of snow and no real melting period, because the temperatures, I don't think, still have been over. Maybe it was one day with I think Friday or so last week, but until then, we didn't really get above freezing. And so what you had was a lot of ice. And I know in my district, I was inundating your staff with a lot of with constituents that were concerned, and there was a lot of fender benders and things, a lot of ice problems, because we have a lot of hills, little hills, but just enough, and a lot of trees. So it really keeps it narrows the streets. We don't have sidewalks, and the ice just stays there because it doesn't get the sun, doesn't hit it if there's even any sun, and there wasn't much sun. So I want to thank you for that. I do want to let you know that I did have one constituent whose yard was damaged, and if we can follow up on that at some point, but we'll talk on that. But anyway, I promised her I said I had the secretary in front of me today, and I would mention that. So she's watching. Without mentioning any names.
We'll follow up, sir.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think I know how to use this clicker, maybe. Let me say this just to tag on to what you said, Mr. Chairman. One of the things we were pretty focused on, particularly in Northern Virginia, but across the state, and I'm not sure how much of this we have done as well in the past, but we got with all the school systems and tried to make sure we integrated the data of where school buses were going to run. So that, our normal prioritization starts with interstates, then goes to primaries, then big secondaries and small secondaries, and it sort of runs downhill like that. In this case, we pivoted some and made sure that we understood where all the bus routes were, so that we could clear those in a primary sort of way in terms of priority. And I think that works well. We'll continue to try to do that. I did note that schools are back in on Monday and Tuesday, most of Northern Virginia, so that's good news. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to address your committee, your subcommittee. You've asked me to speak on a number of items, and so we're going to go through that here this afternoon. Maybe. I hit that way? There we go. The presentation, we'll talk about our budget amendments, WMATA, ERC toll relief down in the Norfolk Portsmouth area, Coleman Bridge tolling, the I-81 corridor improvement program, the Interstate 64 gap widening project, the Hampton Roads Bridge tunnel expansion, the pilot municipal dredge operating program, and the DMV IT system modernization. Our budget amendments that have been proposed are delineated here in the next couple of slides. We have a small one with the Department of Aviation, where we have some savings that's been accruing because of some changes over time where we took a publication we were printing and put it online, and we've had some money savings. And we'd like to be able to take that money and move it over to operational grants to airports to get it to really where it needs to be, because we don't need to have it where it is. And so otherwise it's just piling up there, and we want to move that. We also have a Treasury loan authorization of up to $20 million if and when the Roanoke-Blacksburg Airport finishes their master plan and it's endorsed by the FAA and allows them or calls for them to extend the runway. Basically, the way that works in FAA world is your master plan at the end of the day has to be adopted by the FAA. And they have to tell you that you can extend the runway. And when they tell you that, that allows you to be competitive for funding or start to compete for funding. Typically, it takes a numbers of years. Could be 5, 6, 7, 8 years, but it gets you over the gate, gets you in the game. And so we're going through that process right now at that airport. They're working on their master plan. If FAA endorses an extension, then we'll have that loan available to help get that kick-started. Most of that money typically comes from the FAA, about 80% or more. And so that's why it's critically important, and these are very expensive projects. With the DMV, we are looking to get you to allow us to spend $16 million of non-general fund appropriation to advance the next phase of the DMV headquarters renovation. And I can tell you we're taking a little bit of a second look at that in some ways. Real estate being what it is and prices being what they are, we're trying to make sure we're spending our money wisely there in terms of renovating that building. So we're going to take a second look at that a little bit, but that'll allow us to proceed, assuming that's the right decision to make. As well, at DMV, we are modernizing finally our core IT system. This is something that's been ongoing for years and years and years. We haven't been able to get it done. We formed a team this year that combines people in my office with DMV IT people, with the VITA staff and the contractors. And we have a team that is overseeing this move from a core system into the cloud. And I'll tell you, we've had 2 or 3 times in the last year or so where DMV has gone down because somebody's cut a semi-non-redundant line that goes to the DMV computer system. And so that's all outsourced to Verizon, and that's been cut a couple times, and we've gone hard down. That means state police can't get data, we can't do transactions, and it's not a good situation. And the technology is old and outdated, we need to move. But the point is, we've got a great team, we've got the money to do it, we've launched that, and we need a little bit of help to spend that money on that cause. Flipping to the next page, I-81 appropriation, general fund surplus to advance the I-81 corridor improvement. That's $175 million. It was in last year's budgets, and we're asking for that to be able to move over to I-81. That's really good news, and we're excited about that. We also have some maintenance facilities that are being sold, and typically what we try to do is keep that money in the facilities budget, and so we have an amendment that would do that as well. On toll relief, the toll relief down in the Midtown downtown tunnels, the Elizabeth River crossings, there's some language that will clean up a problem that was created last session. The budget that came out of the Senate that was ultimately adopted had some technical issues with the language that does not allow us to implement parts of the toll relief program. And so we worked with Senate staff and the chairman of finance over there to clean that language up and get it back where it was intended to be. So we'd submitted initial budget language, but it got changed in the Senate and ultimately never got corrected. We tried to get it corrected, but it didn't get corrected, but we're trying to do that now. Coleman Bridge, and I'm going to get into these in a little bit more detail, but we have a provision that would eliminate the tolling on the Coleman Bridge by January of 2026. And it waives the toll repayment that VDOT owes to itself and saves taxpayers a bunch of money. And I'll get into the details and show you why that makes a ton of sense to do. Moving to DRPT, the WMATA numbers that came out of this last session where we put money in to fill Virginia's share of the increase did not get changed in the second year. So the first year we did a true up working with WMATA. The second year placeholder did not get changed. We ran the numbers internally and we calculated as about $11 million decrease. And that's because things that WMATA did where they reapportioned and made some changes. In the last couple of weeks, we've had conversations with WMATA. They think the number's closer to eight and some. We think it's 11 and some. I have no skin in the game. I want it to be the right number is all I care about. And so we're working with WMATA to get to the number that we both agree with. And whatever that number is what we will tell you it should be. And if it's 11, it's 11. If it's 8, it's 8. You know, we're not fighting that. We just want it to be the right percentage and the right number. And there is a budget amendment in here to support the Back Creek Channel off of the York River. There's a bunch of seafood processing, seafood type facilities there, boats that come in and offload. I think there's 13 businesses. They are hamstrung by the dredging down there, and there's a project that needs a local match. And so this would do the local piece of that project and allow that commerce to continue to flow in that down there in, at the York River and Back Creek.
Mr. Chairman, can
Delegate Sickles.
Mr. Chairman, just the last, is that a federal project that we need to have the match for, or is that a non-federal
The Corps will
project?
pay most of that, yes, sir.
So it's a federal channel then?
Thanks, yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
That's my understanding.
Otherwise, we pay 100%, you know?
Yeah, no, the Corps is paying 5.4 million,
Okay.
and we're paying $1 million.
Oh, good.
So that's a good thing.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Back to WMATA. WMATA ridership has increased year over year, but rail remains at about 67% of the 2019 levels. Bus is pretty much back. The decade-long ridership decline, was pre-2019. So since about 2008, 2009, even with expansion, the ridership has continued to decline in WMATA. And that's something we're trying to work on and make sure we understand and how to make that right. The governor's budget amendment provides the state's full half share of the funding. I spoke to that before. Again, whatever that number calculates out to be is what we're going to support, whether that's 11 or whether that's 8 or whatever it is. But we want to fund our full share, and we're committed to do so. There's still some work that WMATA needs to do, and I wanted to update you on that. Per the 25 budget language, WMATA submitted a cost comparison to peer systems, but we still have important benchmarks and context that need to be included there. The latest FTA figures shows WMATA's rail costs, both for service and per trip, remain at the high end of its peers, and you can see that on the chart on your right. WMATA has taken some laudable cost containment steps and is cooperating on an operational analysis to identify cost and non-revenue fare opportunities. We're working closely with WMATA. We have confidence in their leadership. They're digging in. It's a tough problem up there. That's a tough system, and we need to work together to get it straight. And we'll continue to do that. Some of the challenges, of course, remain: contingency and unsustainable subsidy growth while increasing service and headcount. They're up to 380 people in 2025. And so we're continuing to push on that. Their labor costs are big. They're difficult. It's a difficult problem, but we'll continue to work on it. The long-term costs associated with the infrastructure remain a fundamental concern. WMATA's assets are significantly larger than the peers, and more escalators, elevators, and all the things in the back office. That all costs money, and it's all part of the problem of WMATA's numbers. Elizabeth River crossings, I talked to you a little bit about this. I mentioned it about the budget language. So the toll relief program, the initial underlying toll relief program started in 2017, and it started with an annual contribution from the vendor of $500,000. We adjusted that over time by working with them, and the annual contribution today is $3.22 million of toll relief that flows in to allow us to fund that. Initially, enrollment was limited to Norfolk and Portsmouth residents, but as we had more money and could do more with it, we did, and we expanded it to residents of the area, not just Norfolk and Portsmouth. Eligible drivers for that program were $65,000 or less, and they had to prove residency in that area, and that's the underlying program that exists today. The benefit provided for the ERC program, the existing program, is a 50% rebate off of the 2 axle transponder-based tolls in Hampton Roads. And you get a maximum of 14 a week, so you could go every day, you could go back and forth and have that 50% decrease in the toll. They're applied to your Easy Pass Virginia account the following day, so there's a 1-day lag, but that doesn't really cause any concern. So in addition to that toll program, the last budget created the Commonwealth-funded Eligible Drivers Toll Relief Fund. We've moved forward with the implementation of this additional toll relief from the state contribution, and this gives an additional 50%. for people at 50,000 and below. So we've got a $65,000 and below. Now we have $50,000 and below. I need to move my slides, then I apologize. Thanks for looking up, sir. I was just rolling on. I'm on the right slide. Yes. The current budget has residents of Portsmouth, Norfolk, Newport News, Hampton, or Franklin in the program. And that was an error, frankly. The way they wrote the language, it included Newport News, Hampton, and Franklin. There are about 500 people that have taken advantage of that. The problem with that language is the areas that have really been hit the hardest by far is Norfolk and Portsmouth. And when you open up to Newport News and Franklin and Hampton, then you have Chesapeake, and you got Virginia Beach, and you got Suffolk, and you got Isle of Wight, and all these other cities in the area. They're equally harmed, but not so much like Franklin and Hampton and Newport News. So the budget language that the finance chairman has agreed to is to take it back the way it was intended to be, and that's what this language would do. You can see in the slide there's almost 21,000 enrollees as of last December. The monthly average of participants is about 13,000 of that 20, so about 73% use it regularly. Enrollment has increased 43% since January. So all the news and all the marketing and all the newspaper stories have got a lot more participants in there. Average transactions are 18.2, and average month for each user does it 18.2 times a month, and the average monthly credit is $23.95. So as I indicated, the toll relief adjustments would limit the additional toll relief to Norfolk and Portsmouth residents. And it allows the general fund component of the toll relief, this piece, the new piece, to also be used on any shortfall on the underlying program. So we're going to add a 50% program on top of a 50% program. And if the underlying one falls short, we're going to allow money to transfer so that everybody would stay at 100%. That's the concept, and this is what is in the budget. If the projection indicates the funding will not be sufficient, then we would adjust it as need be. So at the end of the day, the Commonwealth Transportation Board, the commissioner, and so forth have sort of authority under the underlying program that comes from ERC, and we would just adjust that as we need to continue this at 100%. Debt forgiveness was another piece of the budget last year, and the debt forgiveness was tied inadvertently to an income restriction. The problem is the debt relief goes back to 2012. And I would have to go figure out what everybody's income was in every year that they had debt and figure all that out and somehow apply it. It's just not practical. And so what we had initially intended to do, and what my language said was, we'll just take everybody that has debt in Norfolk and Portsmouth at this level, and we'll wipe it out and start clean. And that's what this would do. So regardless of your income, because it's just impractical to try to figure it out, if you had unpaid tolls and debt, we would wipe that out in this program. It also removes the $40 DMV fee that DMV charges for reinstating your registration if that's been suspended because you haven't paid your debt. So no harm, no foul, to anybody that has debt there. We get rid of it, start at zero, work at 100%, 14 times a week for everybody under $50,000, and 50% for people between 65 and 50 is where we'd end up. The Coleman Bridge. This is a real story here. So the budget amendment would waive the repayment of any remaining balances owed to the VDOT's toll revolving account facility, the toll facility revolving account. The current situation, so VDOT has a revolving account for toll facilities, and we borrowed money from that to do this bridge. We've paid all the rest of the debt back. The only people that own debt are ourselves, and that debt is currently at $29.6 million. That fund has $80 million in it, and it's got about $200 million coming from accounts receivable. So the fund is very healthy, and we don't have any particular use for that fund right today. There's no planned expenditures, so there's there's plenty of money there. The 29.6 is not going to have any impact in terms of what we want to be able to do. On top of the 29.6 that we owe, we're facing immediately, and I'm holding this off and holding my breath, Mr. Chairman. We got to invest another $6 million to upgrade the toll collection system in order to keep collecting tolls. And then what we're functionally going to do is when we finish, we're going to throw that in the trash and declare a loss on it and move on. So we got to come up with another $6 million, add that to the 29.6, and pay all that back. Currently, the toll for passenger vehicles is 85 cents tolled one way. So you only toll one way. If you're going north, you get tolled. You're going south, you don't. So, about 42 cents if you're on a round trip, if you will. And about 45% of that toll just goes to the cost of operating the tolling system. So it sort of ends up as a nuisance toll. We got a small amount of debt that's owed to ourselves. We're going to incur another $6 million of debt and buy some stuff that we're going to throw away in a few years. And I just think it's a terrible waste of money. So tolls will need to be collected at about tolls are collected currently at about $5.9 million a year and generates a debt payment of about $3.6 million. That's what it is. And so as you add all this together, we'll have $54 million in tolls collected to pay off this $29 million debt. And it just doesn't, and we'll throw that new system away 6 years into its useful life. So really, really important, I think, to let us just write that debt off our toll account, let this place get back to where it was supposed to come off in 2021. Initially, all the other bonds were paid off, but we never increased the tolls, and so the time just got pushed out. So that's where we are today.
Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir.
Sickles.
Just some little.
Yes, sir, Mr.
Make sure I understand this.
Delegate Sickles.
So the toll, if you were to keep it as a toll bridge, you would need to replace the tolling mechanism.
Immediately.
Oh, it's that bad?
I literally have a request out, and I'm fighting that where I can cancel it and not have to pay that $6 million, but it's in the next months. I've got to be able to make a decision.
No way we can keep.
I've begged, barred, and pled. I've pushed them out. The vendor says we're not going to support it anymore, and it's going to crash. And that's where we are.
Okay,
We've pushed it out a number of years.
All right, thanks.
No way around it. So moving on to the corridor program, the 81 corridor program. Wow, this is a great program. It started in 2019 at zero. Zero design, zero program, zero money, zero everything, right? Started in 2019, and one of the things along the way has been certainly once I got here, we need to go faster. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to get my guys to do the clicker. Hold on, too far. All right? Okay. Apologize. That program, as I said, started in 2019. The current value of that program is $3.6 billion. That's up from 3.1 in 2023 and 3.4 in 2024. The estimated delivery of the projects right now that have been approved are 2035 and 2036. You can see that with a $3.6 billion program, our expenditures of $338 million or less than 10% of the money's been spent. And that's because of all the design and all the work that needs to be done. Having said that, a bunch of the projects have been completed. 35 of 65 have been completed, but those are small projects. A lot of them are technology projects and small projects, and we hit those first because we could do them quickly and get the results of those. So those have been completed. The CIP receives over $200 million annually from dedicated funding sources in perpetuity and through the IOEP fund at VDOT and the regional fuels tax. Last year's budget included an additional $70 million in general fund and, of course, the 175 that I've mentioned earlier. So we have 65 projects that are in the current plan. Yesterday, the Commonwealth Transportation Board I'm directed that 4 more projects would be added. They're the next 4 in line. That was briefed to the 81 committee a couple, 3 weeks ago. But we're going to put them in the project, but we're reevaluating everything else that's left, including those 4 new projects. So the data on these projects go back to 2015 and 16 and 17, the data we analyzed, and now it's 2024. So we're going to redo the program, relook, do reanalysis. This is typical. And we'll take the 4 that we even just put in and keep them and analyze them again to make sure that the right 4 in the right order. So it's exciting. The great news is where people were complaining that it wasn't moving fast enough, we don't see anything. Now they're complaining because of the congestion and the problems that the construction creates. And that's exactly what we wanted. That's the way that it works. It's got to get worse before it gets better, and it's getting worse. And it will continue to. But we'll try to minimize that. And we've been very focused on not having too long a section being done at one time, moving them around so we're not disrupting any one place but so much. We've looked for synergies. We saved $70 million by some synergies by doing some that were next to each other. And so we're really being thoughtful and trying to make sure we spend that money wisely. You can see on the following pages, here are some of the programs, some of the projects in the program, and it's showed by the 3 different districts that this covers, the Bristol district, the Salem district, and the Stanton district. And I won't read these, but they're there for your information. That's what's coming up. The current financial program allows for additional projects to be included. As I said, this money does not stop until y'all decide to stop it, if you ever do. And the new tranche of 81 projects are being studied in the corridor improvement plan. The remaining 36 projects that are there now will be reevaluated, and we'll look at the whole corridor again and say, is there something we should be doing differently than the current plan? So that's where we are on 81. Moving to the gap. This is something that happened really fast. Thanks to y'all, appreciate it very much. The GAP project is a 30-mile long project that expands the 64 interstate to a total of 6 lanes, 3 in each direction, all the way now from Hampton Roads to Richmond. So before we had a 30-mile gap, it was 4 lanes only. We bid that in 3 sections. We bid the first section closest here to Richmond, and that's well underway. If you've been down there, you've seen it. It's moving very fast. We've been blessed by the weather during this construction period, and we've got 10.7 miles there that are being widened right now. That's about $280 million of expenditure, and we will complete that in 2027. It looks almost like we'll complete it next week. I mean, it's really coming along well. We bid the segment C, the eastern part, second. And so I'll move to the right to segment C. We broke ground just this past November in 2024. That widens about 9 miles on the eastern end of that. And the estimated cost there is $232 million, again, with a completion of 2027. The good news is we had a really great contractor on the west end and a really great contractor on the east end. And so then we let them bid the middle. And when you have 2 big contractors out there who are already pre-positioned, you get really good numbers. And we got really good numbers. And so we bid that. We approved a contract yesterday for that section. It widens 9.3 miles and closes that gap. That's about a $250 million project, and anticipated completion is in 2029. So well on your way. We're sort of a record-breaking pace there because of the weather and because we got great contractors. But the way they bid this has really been a good way because it really got us some great bids. Moving to the largest VDOT project in history, largest construction project in Virginia, the HRBT expansion project, a $3.9 billion project. It will double the capacity to 8 lanes. This project takes all the bridges that are there now and tears them out. It leaves the 2 existing 2-lane tunnels. It bores 2 new 2-lane tunnels and builds all the bridges back new. And so what we'll have is a total doubling of capacity. The new capacity will be tolled. Those tolls are set by the region in coordination with the Commonwealth Transportation Board, has to agree to the tolling plan. But that is moving along. We did have trouble in the early years on this project. It's delayed about a little bit more than a year from what we originally thought. These projects are complex and they're one-offs. And you don't know what you don't know till you get into some of them. And they had some trouble in the pit initially that created that, and then COVID happened and the world sort of changed. And so right now, Mary has done her job boring the first tunnel. We got to go watch that push through the concrete. That was pretty interesting. And then we've turned it around. You have to take it apart, turn it around, do a bunch of work to it, and start boring again. And we've started boring again. It's working. She's working her way back. And that should be completed by the fall of this year. That's really important because the most complex, the most costly piece of this whole thing, the one that things go wrong, is the tunnel boring. The rest of it is a lot more straightforward. So if we get, which we expect to have the tunnel boring finished in 2025, that's the critical path. We'll be in really good shape going forward. She tunnels about 50 feet per day, and the completion date is now late 2026 or early 2027, about a year or so later than we'd hoped when we originally started the project. I will tell you there's a fairly large incentive for the contractor to get finished in fall of 26. So we'll see if they're able to get that incentive payment or not. We certainly hope so. And this municipal dredge project I mentioned, excuse me, this is a different project. Last year's budget appropriated $7.5 million of general fund money to the municipal dredge program operated by the Peninsula Chesapeake Bay Public Access Authority. That language required us to have a program that would be operated in coordination with the Virginia Port Authority. That program has been submitted for approval to the Port Authority, and we expect that to be approved coming up in April. That will be on the agenda for April. We expect to approve the program and move forward, so we'll be able to start spending that money. And now I'll move to the final slide, DMV IT modernization. I told you we're on a mainframe. It's not the technology of certainly of the future. You can see that we've been working on this for a while. We began in earnest the modernization program in December, just a few weeks ago. It will be in 2 stages. Stage 1 is the proof of concept, test the vendors' approaches and methodologies, and we should finish that by May of this year. And stage 2 will be the full build-out and deployment. The estimated completion is about 3 years after that. Estimated all-in cost is $94 million. That includes the internal staff time and contingency fund, and we've spent about $600,000 to date. We have the resources on hand. The governor's proposed budget authorizes expenditures of the first $25 million to do this out of the special fund. And as I indicated to you, the project team includes VITA, it includes the Secretary's office, DMV IT contractor, DMV IT internal staff, and the contractor staff. We're going to make sure we get this one right. These are hard projects. We got a great team assembled, and we're excited about the opportunity there. So that concludes my remarks in terms of the things you've asked me to speak to, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions for the Secretary? Anybody? Delegate Askey?
Didn't have a question, and
Okay.
Wasn't really planning to speak, but I do want to thank you for the progress on, Mr. Chair. I do want to thank the Secretary for the progress on 64 makes the drive to Richmond a little bit easier, but can't wait till the HRBT is finished. But thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
One question.
Delegate Sickles.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, on the WMATA page, I think your first bullet point talked about, if you could go back to that, talked about
Can I don't know if I can load this back up or not.
Yeah.
That one?
No, not the one before that. No, maybe the one after that. Okay, the first bullet point here. The criticism that WMATA submitted a cost comparison, it omits important benchmarks and context. and this is something I've talked about a lot, I think, with you even in the past. We need to figure out what those benchmarks into the future are so we can know. And I've asked people that before and said, well, we're not the experts. We don't know anything about transit. They have to. How are we ever going to get to the point where we know when we're successful or not with what we're doing? We've got to have something into the future so we don't have this same circular argument going on. We know that it's a very expensive system.
Yes, sir.
Those decisions were made in the 60s and the 70s, and that's why we have this expensive fixed cost system we have now. So be nice to have some benchmarks and know what we're headed toward.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
We're working on it.
Okay.
And we're working closely. We're working. I mean, listen, we're pushing hard on them, and they push back. But we're at the table together, trying to figure this out. They have accepted our operational analysis that we've asked them to complete. They've accepted that readily. They're trying hard. It's a tough thing, and at the end of the day, the labor costs are a huge piece of this, and there's all sorts of issues with that, and it's not easy to change.
Well,
and so, yes, sir. To your
everybody's
point,
information is listening. The labor is taking a 0 cost of living increase.
Yeah, and that's fantastic.
In that latest CBA.
Absolutely.
A 0. So
absolutely. That's I think a couple of years. So that's great, and it's necessary. But yes, sir, we'll continue to work on that.
And one other point, Mr. Chairman. I keep thinking I've heard that our rail ridership is back up to where it was in 2019 prior to COVID.
No, sir. It's about 67%. Rail
Okay.
ridership. Bus ridership is.
Bus
is back.
Exceeding.
Bus is back.
Yeah.
And you sort of see that across. I mean, VRE's in the same boat. They're not back. It's the commuter rails.
I think the secretary needs to go ride the orange line in the morning, like at 7 o'clock.
That's my favorite line. That's where I started.
Well,
That's where I started.
They have the.
It's busy?
Well, it's called the Orange Crush for a reason,
Not because they're serving it on the platform, right?
Right.
Yes, sir. We'll continue to work.
It's interesting that the buses are back because the buses are used by workers and more, it's really a work-related workforce. Whereas this metro, a lot of the metro are tourists from all over the world, but certainly all over the United States coming to the capital to see the sites, the mall, government, see really it's the capital of the democratic world. It's really the capital of the world.
Yes, sir.
So we're very lucky to have it, and we need that really, fantastic metro system to show off. And it's important that we move our tourists around safely, and they love it. It used to be.
There's no question.
They used to make a little bit of money because they used to have they'd buy $10 worth of ticket and they'd go home with $3 still on it.
Their pocket, right?
Yeah, so those days are over. So I think they're losing a little bit on that. I don't know what they call that, but now when you can just use your iPhone and everything. But it's a great system. I use it whenever I go into DC, and I go for a lot of sporting events, restaurants, and everything else. But we have to remember that it's a special metro system, and I think they're doing good. The new leadership, I think they're doing well, and like you heard from Delegate Sickles, the union is being very responsible too.
Yes, sir.
And they recognize that importance. All right, well, do we have any further questions, Mr. Secretary? Thank you very much.
Thanks for
Get
having
ready
me.
for the next snow. I hear there's 2 more on the way,
I'm hoping not, sir.
and but we appreciate your help. And I'll get your staff, my constituent who got her
Yard
yard
damage.
was driven over by a plow. But otherwise, you're doing great, and we appreciate everything.
Yes, sir.
Thank you
You
very
just
much.
let us know how we can help you, and we'll be happy
All
to
right,
answer
thank
any
you.
questions further. Thank you so much. Y'all have a
Right.
safe day.
We are adjourned. Oh, no, we have one more. I'm sorry, we have one more presentation. Yeah, come on up. Come on up. I'm so fast on the gavel. That's the second time I've done. I know. I know. Here we go. So we have the Emergency Management of Virginia. You got a PowerPoint, and would you please introduce yourselves? And is it just you?
No, sir.
Okay, here we go. Come on up. Thank you.
I'm just the opening act.
Okay, good. Well, that's good. Start with your strength.
All right.
There you go. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having us today. My name is Jessica Robison. I am the president of the Virginia Emergency Management Association. Our association is comprised of roughly 900 professionals that perform emergency management activities across all levels of government, healthcare, the private sector, Native American tribes, education, and beyond. Mostly the work of emergency managers goes very much sight unseen behind the closed doors of emergency operations centers and offices. We spend our days planning for the worst days we hope will never come, but when they do, we stand ready to solve complex problems with creative solutions, often with few resources. I bring today with me my legislative co-chair, Brian Meisner, and hopefully the information he shares with you will pull back the curtain and shine a light on the roles and responsibilities we have as emergency management professionals and create a champion for emergency management in each one of you. Brian?
Thanks, Jess. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Again, my name is Brian Meisner, and I'm the legislative committee co-chair for the association. So Jess just gave a great intro about our association and the professionals that we represent throughout the Commonwealth. I want to spend a little bit of time today talking to you about what it is that we do behind the curtain as emergency managers, a little bit about our threat and hazard environment here in the Commonwealth, some of the challenges that we face, and some of the opportunities that we have to be a more resilient Commonwealth moving forward. So one of the most common things you'll see an emergency manager doing is acting in that coordination role during time of crisis. But there's a lot of other things that we're doing behind the scenes. One of the primary things that we do to help make sure we understand the threats and hazards in our community is to conduct a hazard and vulnerability assessment every so often. This can look different depending on which part of the Commonwealth you're in, whether you're in an urban or a rural area, whether you have industry, a particular natural hazard that might make you more susceptible, like a coastal hazard versus an inland flooding hazard. And we use those for our planning processes to make sure that we're accounting for not just a general way to respond, but kind of a more specific way for those hazards that we need to be most aware of. We also spend a lot of time building relationships with our stakeholders. Emergency management is absolutely a stakeholder-driven profession, and it's really important that we know those colleagues in our community, whether that be at the governmental level, with non-government organizations, voluntary organizations who are active during times of disaster, and others that we can call on with those relationships and specific skill sets or resources that they can bring to the table when we're in that time of crisis. We use those relationships and those assessments about our hazards and vulnerabilities to develop plans, policies, and procedures. At the local level, there's a requirement that every political subdivision have an emergency operations plan that is adopted by their governing body once every 4 years. And many other stakeholders, like institutes of higher education, and even in private industry and healthcare, have similar requirements either for their accreditations or just for their best practices with their emergency management programs, where they have similar planning documents and doctrine that they'll update on a recurring basis. We also believe very extensively in making sure the community is trained and aware and prepared to deal with an emergency if one should impact them in their neighborhood or their place of business. We believe that investing that time and effort in individual and household preparedness actually makes us more resilient and hopefully pay some dividends whenever we do have that response that has to occur because those individuals and households are going to be more resilient to maybe tough things out on their own at home. You might not have power or water, but as long as your structure is safe to be in, you're going to be safer riding that out at home with your emergency supply kit that you've hopefully built and maintained as a family or your workplace. And then the last main thing that we do is organize drills and exercises. So all of this effort that we put into building relationships, developing plans, really culminates in that exercise and training process. So we'll take kind of a wider look at some of the supporting staff and stakeholders who are part of our relationship building process, put an exercise together that looks at a particular scenario or looks at the overall response process that we would use as a community and organization, and make sure that everybody's comfortable running through the motions so that it's muscle memory whenever we have an incident that occurs. Our threat and hazard environment is very dynamic in the Commonwealth, and it's certainly dynamic in most states. And from state to state, the environment looks different. However, across the profession, we use three categories for our threats and hazards. So natural hazards, things like strong winds, severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, tropical cyclones, which can bring both coastal hazards in the form of storm surge, as well as inland flooding here in the Commonwealth, winter weather, as we've experienced recently, and then extreme heat and cold as well. On the technological hazard side, these are things in our built environment that we interact with every day. So some of the hazards that we can experience are challenges with aging water and wastewater infrastructure. We can experience challenges with the power grid, particularly as we see technology emerge and things like data centers that are proliferating parts of the state. The grid could be strained, and individual portions of the community might experience more frequent power outages than they did before. And one of the things that we like to highlight, because it's not something that you really think about when you drive past, whether it's a stormwater pond or kind of a regional park lake, almost all of those have a dam or impounding structure. That is something that has to be certified by an engineer with a plan turned into the Department of Conservation and Recreation, signed off on by the local emergency management coordinator in every jurisdiction. We also sometimes run into challenges where HOAs don't realize that they actually have an impounding structure they're responsible for, because the board is residents. They maybe meet once a year, and then all of a sudden we're touching base with them, asking them for an update for their plan that they weren't even aware they had to have. So those are just kind of some of the challenges with our built environment that we interact with on a daily basis. And finally, the third category is our human-caused hazards. We are hearing pretty frequently of cyber attacks and hacks. And so that is something that could wreak havoc with our systems, whether it be at the government level, financial institutions, healthcare, hospitals. So that is something that we work closely with IT professionals in our communities and organizations to make sure they are equipped to plug in to the emergency coordination process if they should need assistance managing one of those hacks when it happens. We do unfortunately see acts of violence in our community at times. And while they're typically lone actors, the psychological impact to the community and the potential impact in terms of victims is very wide-ranging and can take months to years to help those members of the community kind of get back on track to how things were before that act of violence impacted them. And finally, we have some very unique considerations here with our proximity to Washington, D.C., and with the number of military installations that we have in the Commonwealth. One of the things I'd like to highlight for the colleagues that I have in Northern Virginia is we have planning processes that are in place in the event there should need to be an evacuation from the National Mall whenever there's a large planned event, such as the upcoming inauguration. So that's something that's a constant planning effort that is usually months to years in the making for something that has to go off without a hitch in a very short period of time if one of those incidents should occur. So I've shared all this context to kind of prime the phases of emergency management. And as we've said, we're typically behind the curtain. And frankly, we like to be doing that coordination work behind the curtain a lot. But there are 5 different phases of emergency management. So prevention is typically what we think of when we hear Homeland Security. That's working with our law enforcement colleagues to make sure they're aware of all the relationships and resources we have and help with anything that they might need assistance with to thwart an act of terrorism. Mitigation are things that can be done to limit the impact of a disaster before it occurs. These are typically natural hazard mitigation projects, whether they be flood containment projects, elevating structures in a coastal area to make them not flood if there's storm surge, perhaps installing a generator at a facility to serve as a shelter are some examples of mitigation projects. Preparedness are efforts to reduce or eliminate threats and hazards. So once we've experienced a hazard, perhaps taken some steps to mitigate against it, we then want to make sure the public and our stakeholders are prepared to deal with that same hazard if it happens again, so it's less impactful to the community. Response is pretty self-explanatory. It's the things we do to save lives and property during an incident, and then recovery is that process to get us back to normal, or as close to normal as we can after an event occurs, and hopefully more resilient and building back better than it was before. So 3 key challenges that we want to highlight for you today are some recurring themes that we've been messaging on over the last several years. And first and foremost is that across the Commonwealth, only 25% of our localities report that they have a full-time emergency manager whose primary discipline, so their full-time job is that emergency management role, and their program has enough staff to meet that community's needs for its emergency management program. And that data comes from the Local Capability Assessment of Readiness Report that is produced by the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. The second key challenge that we're quite concerned about is that the Virginia Department of Emergency Management relies on 65% of its core functions being funded by competitive and non-competitive federal grant awards. We're very concerned that that's not sustainable. It is very susceptible to the continuing resolution environment that we have in Washington, D.C., where funding allocations are usually delayed or deferred 2, 4, 6 months at a time. So that's a very challenging environment to be able to hold personnel over from cycle to cycle, and it also impacts the subawards that do come down to the political subdivision level in the Commonwealth. And lastly, that federal funding has not kept up with inflation, and on the competitive side of that funding, there was a 10% reduction in federal fiscal 24. The current administration was planning for further reductions. There has been some discussion at the National Emergency Management Association level and with the International Association up at the U.S. congressional level to try to roll those back, but those conversations are ongoing and we're still in this continuing resolution environment. So we are concerned that this is not a sustainable approach to see this core function of government, which is both in state code for VDEM and for our political subdivisions, to be able to maintain the current level of service that our constituents and communities are receiving in the Commonwealth. So when we talk about mitigation and recovery, we certainly are in the recovery phase for several different incidents concurrently here in the Commonwealth. It's important to remember that all disasters are local. Every single thing that we deal with as an emergency management professional typically starts as someone's 911 call, and police or fire resources come to the scene. The incident can't be managed by just those day-to-day standard operating procedures, and emergency management professionals are asked to step in and help coordinate some of that response and then transition the community toward that recovery process. So when there's not a full-time team member or a full-time professional in each community, that community can have varying levels of success as to how well they're able to recover and build back stronger and more resiliently from that event. We also know from some national data that every dollar spent on hazard mitigation before a disaster happens actually saves $6 in that post-disaster recovery cost. There's been some rather extensive work from the National Institute of Building Science, and there's actually some new data that might expand that out even further to 13 to 1 when you start factoring in some of the other impacts in the community. And then nationally, an alarming trend is that we are seeing casualty insurance companies cancel policies in high-risk areas, primarily in coastal areas. That hasn't quite crept up to Virginia yet. It's starting to. It has happened along the Gulf Coast where there's more impactful storms. Unfortunately, it just happened quite extensively out in California with fire risk, and thousands of policies were canceled just recently before the fires that just swept through. So we are concerned that that same trend may come here. And also, most casualty policies do not cover flooding. That is a separate flood insurance policy from the National Flood Insurance Agency. And those costs continue to rise as a result of Hurricane Katrina, Superstorm Sandy, and other extremely impactful storms. For that program to remain actuarially sound, the price just has to keep rising.
And earthquakes.
Yes, and as Justice mentioned, earthquakes as well. So I mean, certainly I don't think we had that on our radar for 2025, but here we are 15 days in, and we've had an earthquake. So just want to leave you with some thoughts as to a path forward. One of the things that we feel most passionately about is making sure that the Department of Emergency Management's requests are met whenever they're put in each year. There have been some smaller requests from year to year. Last year, they did receive support to maintain the disaster warehouse, which is very important for all the political subdivisions who don't have the means to stockpile their own supplies locally. They work with the localities to get those supplies out if there's a local impact. And I believe there's language this year for that to be a permanent item moving forward, so we're very thankful to see that support. But the one thing we want to call your attention to was a request for about $15.6 million to transition 81 positions off of these grants over to general fund support. This is not the first time there have been similar asks from the agency, and we really would hope that we can start to see some of that transition occurring. By transitioning the money, it would also allow the agency to pass more of the grant funding through to the localities, at least for the duration here while the grant funding still exists. And that would really help that local focus to give localities a chance to perhaps have a full-time emergency management professional, purchase some resources for a shelter if they would have to open one, perhaps equip a room that currently is just a bare classroom to serve as their emergency operations center. And it really would help us with that local focus of making sure each community had a baseline of capability to be able to work with each other in the region and also work with the VDEM team whenever there is something more impactful. And to that effect, there is also a bill which has been carried, and we're very appreciative for that, to serve as a matching fund for some of that pass-through. Right now, most localities only get $7,500 on the federal pass-through. So if we're able to see some of their positions transferred to the general fund and increase the pass-through to localities, then perhaps we'd be able to look at something like a minimum of $50,000 matched with a fund of another $50,000, and that might be enough for a full-time individual in some of these communities. So that's all we have prepared, and we certainly will be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Brian. We did have an earthquake yesterday. We kind of laugh about it, but I remember the last one, which was, caused a lot of damage, and was quite scary. And was felt all the way up to, I think, Maine, or maybe even to Canada. There's the fires going on right now in the LA and surrounding area there are very scary. And when you listen to the people there, they said this never happened. I mean, it's not an area where they've ever worried about fires or high winds of that nature. I have a lot of constituents have been contacting me in the last couple of days, worried about fire issues here. And I noticed you didn't have fire on there, but you did have hot weather maybe or something, or heat. But we have been getting many droughts as well. And we had, it's affected agriculture and even people's, gardens and things. And those could cause fire. You can have a fire that starts because the ground is so dry and the trees and everything. And we've never had anybody in government come to our community and say, there's things you should be doing, like moving brush away from your house or whatever, those kinds of things should be done. Is there any kind of outreach that these folks do at the community level?
Sir, yes. One of our primary core functions as emergency managers is to conduct public outreach into the community to address our highest hazards that we do research on based on our localities. It's probably one of the highest priority mitigation items you could have. I know for myself in my locality, I had noticed after the 2018 tornadoes from Hurricane Florence, a lot of our residents did not understand FEMA disaster assistance versus loans. They didn't understand basically the financial ramifications of disasters. So one thing we did was we created a financial preparedness course based off of FEMA resources to deliver to the community. And one of the biggest difficulties with that is we are very passionate about going out into the community face to face with our residents and our constituents to teach them, but we have so many people to teach. And for those of us who are full-time like myself, I spend 40 hours a week doing the planning, the training, the exercise, the preparedness, and we do a lot of our engagements on nights and weekends because that's when people are available, and we go out and we do it because that's how how much we believe in it. So this is why we're advocating for more resources on the front end of disasters, the preparedness, means for staff to be hired by localities, especially those who do not have a dedicated emergency management professional, to really look at all of these opportunities and capitalize on them.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the delegate asking?
My request to speak button was not on, Mr. Chair, but I appreciate it. But since I do have the floor.
Please, delegate asking.
I have the privilege to carry HB 1992, which I believe is coming in front of this committee soon. So I would like the committee to consider it after the presentation.
Just consider, not look favorably upon it.
All right, thank you, Delegate Askew. Delegate Wyatt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to commend you all, and it is a true partnership between VDEMs with what the citizens right here in Central Virginia have dealt with in the last week and being involved, and my calls were directly to the governor's office, and we know it was you all, state and local folks, working together to support the infrastructure so our citizens in Central Virginia could get through this water crisis. And we learn how important water truly is at our hospitals when they become on a medical diversion and they're being sent, folks are being sent to localities that may be 20 and from Hanover County could have been to Chesterfield County, a 40-minute ride. And water just to keep boilers in hospitals, bottled water. And I really got to commend the administration. I know calls went out immediately straight to GE, and they were here within hours. I know calls went out to major corporations and Walmart and other large companies, and trailers of water that were here that dispensed to our citizens were great. I know once our hospital was down in Hanover County, and my call to the it was very urgent with the governor's office, and then you all immediately provide the 15 trailers. We got 2 in our county to distribute water to the citizens as well, to those 15 additional trailers that came to Central Virginia the following morning, either Tuesday or Wednesday morning, I believe. So it could have been a whole lot worse. Y'all's response was great, and we all are in this together to actually support each other when we are in crisis. And I've been hearing about the warehouse, the disaster relief warehouse. If, Lord forbid, we ever get a hurricane to come up the East Coast, up into the coast of Virginia and all our counties that are along the bay, it could be very devastating. So I'm glad we have resources there, and you all already prepared if ever needed to support all the citizens across the Commonwealth. So thank you for all your hard work.
Well said, Delegate. So right now, how many disasters can we handle in the next 2 weeks? We don't, right? Everybody touch wood, as my mom would say. Go ahead.
We'll handle as many as are thrown at us, I mean.
Good. Well, but we obviously, with 25% of localities reporting a full-time emergency manager, we are well underfunded, well undercovered, and we need to do a much better job of that. And you're going to be able to do that if we can get you some more money. So you heard the situation. All right, everybody, without any further questions, thank you very much for your presentation. We learned a lot. We appreciate it. And keep up the good work and keeping us safe. The committee is now adjourned.